The world of music stands frozen in grief and disbelief as Ozzy Osbourne, aged 76, takes his final bow. On July 22, 2025, the Prince of Darkness passed away after a long, grueling battle with Parkinson's disease and years of devastating health setbacks. One of his most haunting confessions now echoes like a prophecy fulfilled. "The past 4 years have been sheer hell for me. My health has been in a terrible state." This wasn't just a rock legend. This was a man who had stared into the abyss again and kept walking, a man whose every breath was defiance in the face of pain. Parkinson's didn't just weaken him, it stole the power from his legs. A horrific fall shattered his spine, leaving him gasping through surgeries and silence. And now, as the world mourns, fate has delivered its final and most vicious strike. Behind the shadow of the Prince of Darkness lay a soul desperate for peace, a warrior worn down by endless war. What happened to Ozzy Osbourne is not just another tragic chapter. It's a revelation so painful, so heart-wrenching, it will leave you shaken long after the final note fades. Before we dive into that legacy, take a moment, hit like, as a gesture of respect for a legend who gave the world everything he had and now leaves behind a silence more powerful than any scream. Because before the roaring crowds, before the blazing lights, before the name Ozzy Osbourne was etched into music history, there was only silence. A silence so heavy it threatened to crush the soul of a boy who didn't grow up to dream, he grew up to survive. In the stained slums of Aston, Birmingham, a young John Michael Osbourne, born in 1948, lived in a cramped home with 6 children and 2 exhausted parents. His father, worn down by factory labor, believed emotion was weakness. His mother, hardened by assembly line hours, rarely had the energy for tenderness. Ozzy, as the world would come to know him, wasn't the clever one or the charming one. He was the overlooked one, a shadow in poverty's corner. School offered no escape. Letters taunted him, numbers blurred and mocked. Dyslexia, misunderstood in the 1950s, was mistaken for stupidity. Teachers dismissed him. Classmates brutalized him. The bullying wasn't just verbal, it was physical, relentless, and no adult ever asked why. At home, pain was met not with comfort, but with belts and silence. Once, after coming home in tears, his father beat him, not because he cried, but because weakness wasn't allowed. Pain didn't get you sympathy. It got you punishment. So Ozzy wrapped himself in silence like armor. But armor doesn't heal, it isolates. By age 14, in 1962, the silence became unbearable. Alone in his dim room, he tied a rope from his mother's washing line, climbed onto a chair, and waited to die. Fate intervened, not with mercy, but violence. His father found him, yanked him down, and beat him again, as if brutality could scare away despair. Something in him cracked that day, or perhaps something hardened forever. He stopped trying in school. He stopped talking. He floated through adolescence with the dead eyes of someone already halfway gone. At 15, he dropped out with no plan, no hope, and no qualifications. He worked where he could, at slaughterhouses, construction sites, factories, but nothing stuck. He was too broken, too scattered. Each job ended the same: fired, forgotten. By 17, he was starving, not metaphorically, but truly. His shoes had holes, his clothes hung in tatters, and hope was a crumpled thing he no longer bothered to hold. In desperation, he turned to theft. In 1965, a failed burglary led to a 6-week sentence at Winston Green Prison. Behind bars, reality hit like iron. He was attacked by another inmate and defended himself with a metal chamber pot, not out of courage, but survival instinct. Yet even in that darkness, something flickered. One afternoon, "She Loves You" by the Beatles crackled through a prison radio, and something inside him lit up. For the first time, Ozzy didn't want to disappear. He wanted to be seen. To be heard. "That moment changed me," he later said. "I didn't know how to play anything. But I knew I needed to be on stage. I needed to scream louder than the pain inside me. That scream became salvation. Not success, yet, but a reason to go on." In that cell, the boy who had once begged the world to let him die made a promise. He would not be forgotten. He would be loud. He would be terrifying. He would be unforgettable. And from that spark, a legend began to rise, not from peace or privilege, but from the ashes of despair, where pain forged a voice that would one day shake the world. Just as the shadows of youth began to lift, something extraordinary pierced through the despair. A sound. A calling. A purpose. Ozzy Osbourne, freshly released from Winston Green in 1965 at just 17, wasn't searching for redemption. He was drifting, still fractured from a world that had never expected anything from him. The 6-week sentence for robbing a clothing store, a desperate act of survival, hadn't fixed him. It only confirmed how disposable society thought he was. He walked out of that cell not changed, but still broken. And then, a miracle came. Not in the form of a savior, but a song. That's how the miracle came. When Ozzy Osbourne heard the Beatles' She Loves You crackle through a cheap radio speaker, it was as if the world split open. It was like hearing God speak to me through music, he later recalled, voice distant and nearly tearful. That moment didn't erase the bruises on his back or the fear in his bones, but it gave him a vision. He didn't know how, but he knew he had to make music. Not polished music. Not perfect music. But music that screamed louder than the pain he'd carried his whole life, louder than the silence of his childhood, louder than the darkness he once nearly gave into. In that same dim bedroom where he'd once tied a rope from his mother's washing line and stood ready to let go, now came a reason to hold on. By 1968, that scream had found its echo. A modest newspaper ad seeking a vocalist led him to a rundown rehearsal room in Birmingham, where he met 3 equally haunted souls. Tony Iommi, a guitarist who played through the pain of missing fingertips, Geezer Butler, a bassist whose obsession with the occult gave their sound its eerie edge, and Bill Ward, a drummer who played like a storm trapped in flesh. They were first called Earth, but a chance encounter with a horror film marquee, Black Sabbath, sparked something deeper. If people pay to be scared, Ozzy once said, why not give them music that terrifies and moves them? They weren't chasing fame. They were trying to survive. Their songs weren't entertainment. They were exorcisms, agony set to distortion, grief turned into guitars. On Friday, February 13, 1970, they released their self-titled debut album. The date felt cursed, as if chosen by fate itself. Critics recoiled, calling the music satanic, disgusting, unlistenable. But the broken, the angry, the lonely, they listened and they felt seen. In a world that never asked how they were, Ozzy screamed it for them. That same year, Paranoid was written in a rush, almost by accident, but it became gospel. War Pigs, Iron Man, and the title track weren't just hits, they were lifelines. Ozzy's voice wasn't trained. It wasn't even technically proper. But it was real. Raw. The voice of someone who had clawed his way back from the edge and dared the world to push him again. I didn't know what I was doing, he later admitted, but I knew it had to be loud. That loudness wasn't volume. It was vengeance. It was a scream that said, I survived, and I will not be quiet. He never learned to read music. Never took lessons. But he didn't need to. His pain was the melody. His wounds were the lyrics. His past was the percussion. And his soul, that was the amplifier. Behind the madman persona, behind the wild antics and the stage theatrics, still lived the boy from Aston, the one who was told he was stupid, worthless, invisible. That boy was still screaming. But now, the world was listening. The early years of Black Sabbath weren't just about inventing heavy metal. They were about reclaiming life. Ozzy didn't build the genre, he bled it into existence. Every concert, every growl, every riff was rebellion against a fate he was told to accept. Even as fame exploded. Around them, sold-out tours, platinum albums, headlines blazing, he remained haunted. The louder the applause, the louder the voices inside him screamed. Success never silenced the hurt. It only masked it. And as the world crowned him a legend, he still felt like a runaway screaming into the void. But that scream changed everything. It didn't just build music, it built myth, it built memory, it built a legacy forged in torment and sealed with resilience. By the mid-1970s, Ozzy Osbourne stood on the summit of heavy metal glory. But beneath the roar of the crowd and the blinding lights, his soul was quietly crumbling. The same voice that once pierced the silence of a generation was now being drowned out by inner demons no spotlight could reach. Black Sabbath had become a global phenomenon, their music thunderous and raw, a lifeline for outcasts and the wounded. But for Ozzy, the louder the world got, the more deafening his emptiness became. Behind closed doors, he unraveled, drowned in addiction, haunted by the wounds of childhood that never healed, numbed by the unbearable weight of fame. Album after album, Paranoid in 1970, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath in 1973, pushed the band into legend, but Ozzy was disappearing. His bandmates noticed. Missed rehearsals, incoherent mumblings, a spark dimming in his wild eyes. Tony Iommi, once his brother in sound, grew cold. The air between them thickened with unspoken blame. Then came 1979, the betrayal. They fired him. Not to his face. They sent someone else. They didn't even have the balls to tell me themselves, Ozzy said, voice heavy with the weight of abandonment. That was my band. It wasn't just a job lost. It was a sanctuary torn away. Sabbath was where his chaos made sense, where his brokenness had power. Without it, he was exiled, discarded like a damaged warning label. He vanished into a Los Angeles hotel room, curtains drawn, soul drowning. I just sat in that room, he later confessed. I numbed myself until I couldn't feel anything. I thought I would fade away in that silence. To the world, he was still Ozzy Osbourne. But in that room, he was a fading echo of himself, a ghost with a pulse, a scream trapped inside the man who once taught the world how to scream. But legends don't vanish. They transform. And in Ozzy's darkest hour, something stirred in the ashes. Sharon Osbourne, the daughter of Sabbath's former manager, saw more than a broken rock star. She saw a man not yet finished. She pulled him from the wreckage and whispered the impossible. You were the magic in that band. You can do this without them. Her faith struck him like lightning against soaked stone. Then came Randy Rhoads, young, focused, almost unearthly in his brilliance. His guitar didn't just play, it wept, soared, and screamed. To Ozzy, Randy wasn't just a bandmate, he was a lifeline. Together they forged Blizzard of Oz, released in 1980, not a celebration, but an act of survival. Songs like Crazy Train weren't just anthems. They were resurrections. Every lyric, every riff was a declaration. I'm still here. I still matter. Looking back, that collapse wasn't the end. It was the crucible. Ozzy had to be shattered to discover the raw, resilient fire within him. I was out of control, he admitted. But somehow I kept going. I always kept going. The bond between Ozzy and Randy ran deeper than music. It was spiritual, sensational, almost celestial. Randy didn't just bring talent. He brought light, purpose, and grace to a man reeling from betrayal and barely hanging on. His youth wasn't reckless, it was refined, disciplined. They weren't just making music, they were building salvation in sound. Their second album, Diary of a Madman, 1981, was more than a follow-up. It was a defiant roar from a man once discarded as damaged goods. Ozzy would later say, Randy wasn't just a guitar player. He was my friend, my little brother, the only reason I didn't give up. On stage, they were electric. Ozzy, raw and unhinged. Randy, precise and transcendent. Off stage, they were two souls bonded by laughter, philosophy, and a shared urgency to create something that would outlive them. But storms never last. And deep down, Ozzy felt it, an eerie calm before the universe dealt another brutal blow. On March 19, 1982, while on tour in Leesburg, Florida, Randy boarded a small plane for a joyride. Ozzy watched from below, smiling faintly, unaware that he was witnessing the last flight of his closest friend. On its third pass, the plane clipped the tour bus and exploded into flames. Randy Rhoads, just 25, was gone. Ozzy collapsed, screaming his name, crumbling beside the wreckage. I lost a part of myself that day, he said later. It wasn't just Randy's body in that fire, it was my hope, my music, my reason to breathe. The laughter stopped. The shows were cancelled. The house went quiet. Not even Sharon could reach him. He vanished into silence, drowning in alcohol, paralyzed by grief. I didn't want to live. I didn't want to play music. I didn't want anything. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was soul death. But somehow, from that hollow silence, Ozzy began to write again, not to move on, but to remember. Every word, every scream, became a tribute. His survival became an act of defiance, and every performance that followed carried the weight of Randy's spirit. He wasn't healed, but he was still moving, and for Ozzy Osbourne, that meant he was still alive. You'd think that surviving such devastation would teach the soul to heal, but grief isn't logical. The years that followed Randy's death weren't filled with recovery. They were lost to a darkness deeper than fame ever pierced. The 1980s blurred into chaos. On stage, he was a myth. Backstage, he was broken. Volatile. Gone. Sharon, his anchor, tried everything, refusing to let him drown. But even her love couldn't always reach the fog within. "I wasn't even in my own life," Ozzy whispered years later. "I was just gone." By 1987, alcohol had consumed him. Pills blurred everything. Then came August 1989, a night born not of rage, but collapse. In a haze he barely remembered, Ozzy came dangerously close to destroying the one person who had given him everything, Sharon. "It wasn't me," he later confessed. "It felt like I was watching someone else." That night ended with handcuffs and heartbreak. Sharon said, "I didn't know whether to press charges or call for help. I just knew something had to change, for both of us." Ozzy was sent not to jail, but to a psychiatric facility. Inside, there was no spotlight, no stage, no screaming crowd, just silence. For weeks, he barely spoke. The voice of metal was now a whisper echoing with regret. A counselor asked what he feared most. Ozzy didn't hesitate. "That she'll walk away. That I've finally pushed her too far." But Sharon didn't leave. She returned, tired but fierce, and said, "You're still in there. I know it." It wasn't forgiveness. It was war. In that facility, he fought not for fame, but for the right to keep the love he almost destroyed. Detox burned through him like wildfire, cleansing not just toxins, but denial. Every memory, every scar, surfaced. It wasn't healing. It was reckoning. But day by day, step by step, Ozzy clawed his way forward. And in 1990, something miraculous happened. He returned to music. Not with chaos, but with clarity. Teaming with Zakk Wylde, they began crafting No More Tears, an album born not of rebellion, but survival. Released in 1991, it wasn't just a comeback. It was a confession. Tracks like Mama, I'm Coming Home and Road to Nowhere weren't just hits, they were open wounds. "It was the sound of me trying to be human again," he said. Fans who feared he was gone for good now saw him rise, not as a myth, but as a man. Yet the battle never stopped. Every show was a victory. Every sober day, a miracle. Sharon stood not as a savior anymore, but as a soldier, fighting beside him, not for him. "I owe her everything," Ozzy confessed. "She saved my life not once but every single day." Their marriage, once trembling beneath the weight of madness, evolved into a testament of endurance, flawed but unbroken. In the early 1990s, Ozzy threw himself into work, as if afraid of what might surface if he ever stopped moving. He toured relentlessly, released more music, and even announced a farewell tour in 1992, only to return again and again. Because though he had survived, the pain hadn't vanished. It haunted him in the quiet, echoed in his lyrics, and lived behind his eyes. When Ozzy howled into the dark on stage, it wasn't for spectacle, it was survival made sound. He was screaming not to be heard, but to stay alive. Years later, he reflected, "I never thought I'd live this long. Every day is borrowed time, and I'm just trying to make it count." For those who knew his story, the jails, the near losses, the madness and mercy, it wasn't a comeback. It was a resurrection. The Prince of Darkness had stared into the abyss, and instead of surrendering, clawed his way back, bruised, bleeding, but breathing. Though the wounds never truly healed, he wore them as proof. Survival is not luck, it's a choice made in the pit of despair and made again every day after. But just as it seemed he'd earned a fragile peace, life struck again, not with scandal or addiction, but with a failing body finally reckoning with decades of chaos. The early 2000s should have been a golden era. Ozzy's music was reaching new generations, and the Osbournes, a raw, unscripted glimpse into his home, turned him from metal legend into a confused, oddly lovable cultural icon. The grumbling, mismatched clothes-wearing dad who fumbled with remotes became a sensation. But behind that strange domestic stardom was a man walking a tightrope. By then, his joints ached, his reflexes dulled, his health unpredictable. And then, on December 8, 2003, everything changed. A casual quad bike ride turned catastrophic when he lost control, the vehicle flipping violently, shattering his collarbone, ribs, neck, and collapsing his lungs. He stopped breathing. Rushed to the hospital, placed on a ventilator, Ozzy lay in a coma for 8 days. Sharon recalled, "I thought I was going to lose him. I was bracing for goodbye." But once again, against all odds, Ozzy woke. Doctors warned recovery could take years, but Ozzy had made a career out of doing the impossible. Through agonizing rehab and pain that left him breathless, he fought back. Months later, he stunned the world by walking onto the stage at the Brit Awards. But the accident left deeper scars. Chronic pain became a constant whisper. "I wake up and it hurts," he admitted. "But I'm still breathing. That's enough." His strength wasn't loud guitars anymore. It was in the stubborn act of rising when staying down would be easier. He turned survival into an art, pain into poetry. And just when the storm seemed to pass, fate struck again. In 2019, a fall at home dislodged the metal rods fused into his spine years earlier, triggering catastrophic injuries and unimaginable pain. "It was beyond anything I've ever felt," he whispered. But worse was still to come, a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, a slow, cruel thief that didn't destroy in chaos, but eroded silently, piece by piece. For a man who once ruled the stage, it felt like a betrayal of everything he was. The tremors began. Balance faltered. "I can't walk properly these days," he confessed. "I'm just wobbling." No rock star mask, just brutal honesty. The man who once defied death now faced time, and its slow, merciless unraveling. Still, he didn't give up. In 2020, Ozzy released Ordinary Man, an album haunted by pain, but radiant with defiance. It wasn't just music. It was a battle cry. "I'm still here," it said. "I still have something to say." His fight was never for fame. It was for meaning, for the right to keep going when everything screamed to stop. Every step, every lyric, every show became an act of rebellion. Even when surgeries stacked, when hospital beds replaced stages, when Kane supported what passion once carried, he didn't surrender. "I'm not ready to hang up my mic yet," he declared, and in that single sentence lived fire, memory, and relentless hope. That's what made Ozzy's story so achingly powerful. Not the fame, not the legacy, but the refusal to fall quietly. In his final years, time became the greatest adversary. Parkinson stole what no scandal, crash, or addiction could, his body. His voice, once thunder, became a whisper. But even as he trembled, even as he stared into mirrors unsure of who looked back, he whispered, "I'm still fighting." Life narrowed. Sharon remained by his side. Not just as his wife, but his pillar. Their home transformed into a sanctuary of support, ramps, railings, soft music, quiet dignity. On good days, Ozzy would sit in his garden with headphones, reliving the riffs that built him. On others, he entered his studio, not to record, but to remember. Though his body weakened, his mind remained sharp. He cursed, joked, surprised interviewers with flashes of wit. And when he spoke of death, it was with no fear. "It's just the next tour," he said, but without the soundcheck. That was Ozzy. Defiant. Unfiltered. Even in decline. He cancelled the rest of his shows, knowing the curtain had fallen. But he refused to let that be the final note. He crafted his goodbye not with fire and noise, but with grace. A quiet exit from a life that had been anything but. His legacy, built not on perfection but perseverance, lives louder than any encore. Though he no longer performs, though the lights have dimmed, the echo of Ozzy Osbourne still roars. At 76, worn by time but never erased by it, he proved a final truth. Legends don't die with the music, they live on in the silence that follows. On July 5, 2025, something unfolded that felt less like a concert and more like a closing prayer for a generation. Ozzy Osbourne, flanked by the original members of Black Sabbath, returned to the soil where it all began, Birmingham. They called it Back to the Beginning, but what transpired felt more like the edge of an ending. Over 40,000 fans filled the arena while nearly 6 million more watched from around the world. When Ozzy appeared, slowly and leaning on a cane with Sharon by his side, the crowd fell silent, not out of restraint, but out of reverence. This wasn't just a performance, it was a farewell forged in tremors, both physical and emotional. His voice cracked with age, his hands trembled, but when the first notes rang out, time blurred. Every lyric dripped with memory. Every riff was resurrection. "This is it," he whispered, and hearts broke in unison. "This may well be the last time I ever stand on a stage," he said, not with sorrow, but with serene finality. That night, the curtain didn't crash. It floated down like dusk on a career carved in thunder. True to form, Ozzy didn't just exit, he elevated. Every dollar from the concert, a staggering $190 million, went to causes close to his heart: Parkinson's research, Birmingham Children's Hospital, and Acorn Children's Hospice. It wasn't just a parting gift. It was a final vow that even in decline, he remained a force for light. In the final weeks of his life, no longer chased by spotlights or drowned in pyrotechnics, Ozzy reached fans in quieter ways, through raw honesty shared on the Osbournes' podcast with Sharon, and through gentle moments in the garden, grandchildren at his feet, telling stories not of chaos, but of survival. Before he left this world on July 22, 2025, Ozzy offered us one last lesson, the same one he lived his entire life. Legends aren't built in the noise, they're proven in the silence that follows. And even when they fall, they rise again in echoes. In those twilight moments, surrounded not by fame but by family, Ozzy was held by the very legacy he'd built. His children, each one carrying a piece of his fire, stood as living proof that resilience runs in blood. Amy Osbourne, his eldest, chose a path away from cameras, quietly making music under her own terms. Kelly, the mirror of his defiance and grace, carved her own place in media and fashion, honoring her father's strength in every stride. Jack, once a reality TV kid, became a documentary producer and his father's steady rock, present at doctor visits, handling business, and bearing the weight of a myth too heavy for one man alone. From his first marriage to Thelma came Jessica and Louis, private but always part of his constellation. With each of them, especially Kelly and Jack, there existed more than affection. It was survival passed down through generations. As he retreated from the stage, they became not just his legacy, but his lifeline. Perhaps the most powerful part of Ozzy's final chapter wasn't found in the music he left, but in the intention he carried forward. No longer seeing wealth as freedom, he shaped his $220 million fortune into a compass. In 2024, he finalized a will not born of fear but gratitude for the life he survived. Sharon and their 5 children would inherit his estate through structured trusts, including provisions for his grandchildren's health and education. But beyond bloodlines, vast portions of his fortune were dedicated to mental health programs for musicians, addiction recovery centers, educational grants for working-class youth, and lifelong funding for animal rescues, a quiet nod to the dogs who gave him comfort when nothing else could. "They gave me back to myself," he once wrote in a private note now attached to his will. "So I owe them the rest of me." Sharon confirmed this note would be read aloud, a final echo of a man who once screamed into the void and now left behind a vow. Ozzy even ensured that royalties from his solo work would forever feed these causes. "Music saved me. Maybe it'll save someone else," he said. 10 words that captured a lifetime of pain, purpose, and perseverance. Since his second induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2024, this time for his solo career, Ozzy's image transcended culture and became spiritual. His face now graces murals. His riffs pulse through subway headphones. His lyrics are inked onto skin and studied in classrooms. But his true tribute lies in the people who chose to keep fighting, because he did. Ozzy Osbourne, the madman who bit bats, defied death, and lived with every scream, now rests. He doesn't rage against the dying of the light. He faced it and walked into it with memory, courage, and peace. If these words stirred something in you, if part of your youth, your healing, or your story is tied to the sound of his voice, say thank you. Leave a comment. Share a memory. Because Ozzy's legacy isn't just a history of madness. It's living proof that even the most broken souls can leave the world brighter than they found it. Rest now, Ozzy. The noise has faded. May the silence bring you peace. In the place where you are now, there are no more surgeries, no more pain, no more Parkinson's, only light, echoes of guitars, and a timeless space where legends no longer have to fight. Rest easy, Ozzy. You've earned this peace.